Hey guys, it's Ozzy Mora here with the Education Station, and today we're talking about something that is in everyday life: AI, artificial intelligence, and the classroom is no exception. I recently read an article about how a school district, I won't name the district, is coming up with AI policy, but they're inviting all staff from HR, school bus drivers, et cetera, you name it, to participate in a task force to talk about how to better use AI in the classroom. And for staff teachers, it takes a whole team. So, with that, we're going to be talking to my good friend now, Megan Griffard with UNLV. Megan, nice to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you.
AI. So, Megan, you work at a ton of stuff with UNLV,
Yeah.
research, you name it.
Yes. So I do research. I'm an assistant professor, so I do research and I also teach graduate students.
Oh, you're in the classroom.
Yes. Yes.
So today we're talking about artificial intelligence, AI. There's so many questions around it still, and people use it every single day, even some of our students. I know our school district, Clark County School District, on their website, it says they have AI tools and resources provided by the district that are intended for educational purposes. Now, I want to talk about this article that I mentioned right now, focusing how they're bringing in basically everyone, not just teachers, but also school bus driver, HR, to talk about how to better use AI in a classroom setting. So when you hear that, Megan, what do you think? What do you process out of that?
I think when I hear that they're trying to include everyone, I think that that's an excellent approach because school bus drivers and people that and interact with students in non-academic settings have a really good sense of like what children are interested in and what keeps their attention and what they're doing when they're not in class. And so that can be really informative for figuring out how to best use this tool in the classroom.
And when I hear a lot of the word responsible
Mhm.
AI use. What does that mean for an educator or for everyone in the classroom?
So there's a couple of things with responsible AI use. One thing we know that's been emerging from the research recently is that AI takes a tremendous amount of particularly water resources. It's very hard on the environment. And so making sure that we're not overusing AI or over relying on it for things that we could use it our own thinking
Right.
for. And so it's just really important for folks to be mindful of, every time you type a question, no matter how difficult the question is, into something like Chat GPT,
Right.
it takes about 16 ounces of water for the large language model, the AI tool, to generate its response to you. And obviously for more complex questions, it's more.
Right. When you say water, can you explain that to people that might not understand what that would mean?
Sure. So, large language models, AI tools, operate on really large computers. And if you've ever held a laptop on your lap for a long time, even if you're just using simple programs like word processing and email, it gets pretty warm. So imagine that on like a million times scale. So these very large computers that need to be cooled down, and so water systems are one of the ways that we do that.
Understood. So you also mentioned that, using too much of AI can impact critical thinking and
hmm
problem solving. How could we turn that around? How could we as students, right? I'm speaking as a student or educator, better collaborate with AI. That way we don't see it as a negative thing. Because it's talked about a lot as being negative, right? But
Yeah.
I know that several educators in other school districts are trying to turn that around and trying to make it more into a positive experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we hear about like the controversy around AI, I remember growing up, my mom was a children's librarian at my elementary school,
Mhm.
and the internet was just, becoming like widely used. And so it was making sure that people were digitally literate and had the tools to be able to determine what was a good source on the internet, what was a less reliable source on the internet. And so now we're just seeing that in a much more sophisticated way because there are, videos and articles and things that are produced by AI that might be excellent, but there are also things that might be misinformation. And we're already struggling with that in terms of, the idea of like fake news and things like that. And so it's just making sure that there are ways that people can identify when something that's generated by AI is reliable and when it's not.
So how can we identify as students, educators? what ethical AI would look like. What does ethical AI use mean for an educator or student?
Yeah, I think that's a question that's gonna be answered in, like, the next, decade or so. So even I, like, as an educator, like, I often use AI to help me with planning for my lessons for my students to make sure that I have enough activities that are engaging because often, like, the limits of my creativity are could make class very boring, and so if I can ask AI, like, "What would be a good activity that students could do, related to this topic?" And it can give me some ideas, and so I think it's a great tool to use to enhance what you're already doing, but I think the concern is when we're using it to replace what we're doing. So I'm still planning my lessons. I'm still, doing all the research and the reading that's required to be an effective professor in the classroom. But I'm also using AI to make sure that my students are getting the most bang for their buck and getting the most out of the experience. And they're not just sitting there and listening to me talk for 4.5 hours.
Right, right. And that brings me to my next question. So you use AI, which I appreciate you being transparent. What tools do you know what tools do you know what to use? What do you know what to use when it comes to the tools, when it comes to AI? Because there's so much out there to use.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's really tricky. I think the platforms that are usually the most reliable are the ones that have been vetted by whatever organization you work for, the IT department. So, for example, at UNLV, our IT department gave a recommendation about which AI tools are the most effective for the work that we do in education at UNLV, and so they've recommended we use Gemini for our AI. It's very similar to other large language models like Grok and ChatGPT, but they've done the background now research and study to figure out like what's the most effective for our particular circumstances, and also to make sure that it doesn't violate any of the ethics that we have in place at UNLV.
So how do you or how have you changed your writing assignments when you assign them to your students?
Mhm. So one of the things that is great about technology is all of our grading platforms, and this is pretty universally true in both K-12 settings and in higher education settings, do have the ability to detect when something has been written by AI. And so we have statements in all of our syllabi. It's a university policy that we have a statement that says, like, using AI to replace your critical thinking and your writing is not what we want. And that's obviously not going to get you a passing grade. And then at this point, I think it's sort of almost become like a colloquial joke that you can recognize when somebody's been using AI to write because suddenly they have these like very unique headings and these bullet points and bold. There's some things that large language models do when they produce writing. They use a lot of M dashes, for example. And so sometimes you can just look at a student's paper and you can say, I wonder how accurate this is. And then conveniently, our software platforms that we use for students to submit assignments also will tell us like the likelihood that something's been generated by AI. So teachers and professors know when students are writing with AI, especially if we have students who are struggling writers and then all of a
All
sudden,
of a sudden, they're amazing.
yes.
Which, I mean, probably,
Mhm.
there's situations like that, but you know your students, right?
Yeah, yeah, and my students are graduate students, so they're already pretty sophisticated writers, but then, sometimes we can identify if maybe they've taken the easy way out on an assignment.
Yeah. So, how can AI be infused in different subjects?
Yeah, so I think that AI is super helpful in, courses like statistics and organizing large data for data analytics and things like that. And so sometimes in our research, we do use like very large, multi million observation data sets. And so being able to comb through those using AI can be really much more efficient
Mhm.
for the analyses that we're trying to run.
Now, I know you mentioned you work with UNLV. I also mentioned that too. Do you know what the policy is for UNLV when it comes to AI use?
So it is sometimes used as a tool to enhance
Hmm.
research. So, for example, there are a lot of researchers and students that will use AI to say, hey, I'm interested in these topics. Like, what are the best, like, peer-reviewed journal articles to read to get informed on the topic? But then the thing that we don't want to see students doing is using it to do their actual assignments for them, because obviously that's not the point of learning or going to school.
Right. What is the risk of having no AI policy at all, like at a school like UNLV?
Mhm. So I think the risk is, it could erode academic integrity. And so the reason that we have these policies about like AI cannot do your assignments for you is because we don't want students to be dishonest about where the thinking behind their work comes from. And so if you're using AI to replace again your own thinking and your own interpretations, then it becomes a really big issue.
Right. Do you believe that the AI policy, having an AI policy, fosters innovation?
That's a great question. I think it has the potential to foster tremendous innovation because it can help students access material. Especially we have, I mean, here in Clark County and at UNLV, we have so many students who are new language learners. So English is not their first language. And so having something that can help translate really complex texts and help make complex ideas more understandable, especially in STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, and math, it can be really useful to help students build foundational skills to then be able to do more complex work again on their own.
On their own. Going back to the English language learners, I've seen in some classroom settings, not necessarily here in Clark County, the school district, but in other schools will the teacher will let them bring out their phone and they can use it to help them with an assignment.
Hmm.
Usually, you'll have a student that also speaks, say Spanish, right? To
Hmm.
help them along the classroom. What do you think of having that cell phone, out, helping them translate? I feel like it could get a little tricky sometimes because then other students aren't allowed, right, to take out their phones during the class. But in this case, it's for a different use.
Yeah, so I think for teachers that have language learners in their classrooms, like making sure you have really clear boundaries with your students about, like, okay, my student who's a language learner is using
Mhm.
their cell phone for translation purposes and not for games or texting or TikTok or whatever it might be. And so it's really going to be that's, something that AI can't teach us is good classroom management skills. That's just something that you have to learn through the experience of being a teacher and going through a teacher education program.
Right.
So, again, like AI is a wonderful tool, but we still need the people there to facilitate how we're using it.
Right. And it also takes away the communication skills, like as an English language learner or just, student, it takes away that communication
Mm.
skills that some people are starting to lack already because we live on our phone. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what we do nowadays, whether it be we're on social media before we go to bed or during the break or eating our lunch. So there's just so many things in the way of communications skills, but that's just my thought.
No, you're absolutely right. I think our communication has changed significantly,
Yeah.
and I think the pandemic absolutely accelerated the way that we engage with technology.
Mhm.
We can see that there are kids these days.
It's okay.
um, there are kids that don't get their driver's licenses, whereas I remember being a teenager and it was like I could not wait to drive. But now most of their interfacing with their peers and their friends happens on their phone, so the incentive to get out of the house and do things is a lot lower. And so I think parents and families and schools and communities need to be really mindful of like phones are wonderful, AI is wonderful, but
Right,
we still want kids to know how to talk to each other, to know how to talk to adults,
right.
especially in education. We want kids to be able to advocate for themselves. So, have the communication with a teacher if, they need help on an assignment or extra time, or they want to debate what grade they received. And so, still having solid face to face communication skills is going to be essential.
Like many students, they don't feel, not all, but some students don't feel the need or the urgency to, get their driver's license or get a job because a lot of people now are just using social media, right? Well, there's nothing wrong with that to work.
Hmm.
Or like you said, they're meeting friends online, but they're
Hmm.
never meeting that friend in person.
Hmm.
And that also another, roadblock there to that communication skill set. I want to go back to the policy, AI policy, because that's
Hmm.
if you're just joining us right now, I'm with Megan Griffard. She's with UNLV. This is about AI in the classroom. It's just an evolving thing. I feel
Hmm.
like you mentioned 10 years from now, it's going to be completely different from what we're talking about right now,
Hmm.
How often do you believe the AI policy at a school district or, a campus like UNLV should be updated?
I mean, technology just moves so
Yeah,
quickly.
so fast.
So I think, as best that schools and universities can try to keep
Mhm.
pace with what's happening with AI and the ways that it's being used. And one way that would be really beneficial is just to get student input. Like, how are you using AI? How do we see that enhancing your education? Are there any things that you're telling us that we identify as potentially problematic for you to becoming an outstanding learner and productive member of society?
And if you're just joining us again, the article was based on having some sort of task force of all involved at a school district. So, like school bus drivers, HR, teachers, you name it.
hmm
Why must an AI policy cover all district staff?
Um, I think we know that, students are on their phones all the time. So they're on their phones in the bus, on their phones in the hallway. And I think another thing just that I think that school districts are being mindful of when they include all of their staff in the development of these policies is we've seen that social media and being on your phone too much, especially for young people, is
Mhm.
so detrimental to their mental health. And so making sure that everyone that interfaces with students during the school day understands what potential red flags to look for to see if maybe a student is struggling with their mental health or having thoughts or feelings related to suicide or suicide ideation. And so a lot of that can stem from the phone, and so just giving everyone as much information as they can to be able to look out and keep kids safe.
Right. So, a lot of the conversations and, articles that I read or people I talk to, they're always worried about the students, right? When it comes to, are they using AI to write a report? I can tell. But what about the educators, that are using some, again, just want to
Mhm.
be clear, some that are using AI to create material lessons, or lesson materials, excuse me. What do you say to that?
Um, Again, I think it's one of those things where it's like it's an additive, it shouldn't be a
Hmm.
replacement. So, like I mentioned earlier, like I use AI to come up with really engaging
Right.
activities for my students because I'm not always the most creative and I want them to be engaged in class. Especially like my students are graduate students. They come to me at the end of their workday after they've taught kids all day. And so to just sit there and passively get knowledge is not always the best. And so using AI as an enhancement, I think, is a great way to approach its use in the classroom. But I think if you use it to completely replace the art and science of being a good educator, then you've really made a grave misstep.
Right. Can you provide an example of how you use AI when you're about to teach your class?
Mhm. Yeah. So, for example, one of the things that I was working on with my students was
Mhm.
the importance of my students are all teachers looking to become school administrators. And so we were working on the importance of building trust between administrators and staff in school
Mhm.
because we know the research says that's so important for student achievement, staff retention, school climate, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And so I had, my slides that I had made myself. I had done my actual reading and research to prepare the materials, but then I was like, how can I make drive this point home with my students? What's an activity I can do to get them to really think about like how important it is for there to be trust between the school principal and the teachers who work for that principal?
Mhm.
And so I asked AI, what would be an activity that students, I described the student population could do to understand the importance of trust in schools. And so
You're prompting the AI. You're writing a
yes.
prompt. Okay.
Yes. And so it gave me back an example of how students think about a time when trust was broken and how that felt, and then to do like a think, pair, share
Mhm.
in it with a partner in class and to talk about it. And the conversations got really deep. And so students really could see like not only the pain at having trust broken from their own experience, but talking to a partner about what they had gone through was, I think, more impactful than just me clicking through my PowerPoint presentation for class.
Right. Vulnerability, right?
Right.
That
hmm
vulnerability. So AI, would you agree, helped you personalize student feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah. So in that context, I think it did great. In in providing just something that, connects students to the material that we're talking about in class. I think that that's where it can be great. But you had mentioned student feedback, and so
Right.
um, for grading, I don't think that that would be an appropriate use of AI.
Mhm.
Except, maybe to check for plagiarism, check references, something like that. But to give the actual substantive feedback on student work, I think that still is one of those areas that absolutely needs to come from the educator in the classroom.
Do you ever worry? I know that you deal with graduates, right?
Hmm.
I'm talking about maybe undergraduate. Do you believe that there will ever be a time where educators can't figure out if students are using AI or not because students are starting to figure out how to get around where educators can't realize what's them, if they're writing it?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that that's always a concern, and so technology moves so
Yeah.
fast, and um,
Because that's scary. That
yeah,
is scary.
it is scary, and it's also, I feel like young people are always on the cusp of, like, whatever the latest cutting edge technology is, and
Mhm.
so there is always, like, for, the people in the workforce and education and things like that, there is always sort of a little bit of a catch-up period,
Right.
and so I think one of the things that is just super important for educators is you have to know your students. You have to get to know
Right.
them on a personal level, and that makes it a lot easier, if they're using AI to suddenly, or not even suddenly, to be able to recognize, like, okay, this is the student I know, this is the caliber of work that they do, this is, who they are as a person and what their interests are. And then if you see something completely different in an assignment, you can at least broach the subject of, like, how much of this was your original work and how much of this was generated from AI.
Right. During your experience using AI, what AI skills are essential for educators?
Um, I think one of the great things about AI is it can make a lot of processes more efficient.
Mhm.
And so it's great for getting started on a lot of projects. So, you can ask AI to help you with, like, what would be great readings, peer reviewed articles or books or whatever for a certain topic. Like, which ones would you assign to students? Which one should I, as the educator, read myself to present the information from? Um, but again, I think it needs to be thought of more as a partnership rather than a replacement for the work that educators do. Um, but I do think it holds a lot of promise for education because
Yeah.
we know that teachers are so overworked. There's always that misrepresentation that teachers get, summers off and they go home at 3 o'clock when the bell rings, but that's not, you know, true for the most part, especially for our most dedicated educators. And so finding ways to simplify, especially the mountains of paperwork that are often involved in teaching and navigating the bureaucracy, AI could be really beneficial for making those processes either easier and giving teachers the breathing room they need to really focus on meeting students' needs in the classroom.
It's more of a collaboration where before when I had conversations with educators, they didn't really want to talk about it, right? They
Mhm.
were scared to, but now everyone's being more open about it. It's
Mhm.
here. Everyone uses it.
Mhm.
Everyone uses it differently as
Mhm.
well. At every school district, not every, but in most school districts, I've been seeing that they are having an AI policy. What is the risk of not having an AI policy at all?
I think it's one of those things where it can just, there is the potential for a snowball effect in
Yeah.
terms of, if you don't have a policy not only for your students about how much they can use or what ways they can interact with AI for doing work, but also if you don't have your teachers that go in and, if they're completely reliant on AI for lesson plans and grading, it's like, what do we need teachers for? And there's so much that teachers obviously do that's outside of, lesson planning or AI can't build relationships with students or
Mhm.
um, develop some of those soft skills that we want students to get that you really only get from face-to-face interactions. And so I think school districts and universities are very aware that this is, a budding technology, and
Mhm.
they need to figure out ways to embrace it in smart and efficient ways that don't deter or cause detriment to student learning and excellent teaching.
Right. And you're an excellent teacher, by the way. I've seen some of your stuff. And speaking about that, there's conversations about the field and educators' jobs, teachers' jobs changing because of AI. Do you worry about that?
Again, I'm not super worried about it. I think it can be a great complement in terms of improving the efficiency of what's asked, especially of our K-12 teachers. But the relationships and the things that if you ask, an adult who their favorite teacher was, they'll tell you something about, it's not going to be like, oh, so and so
When she used
was
AI.
so organized, was so organized or, always
Yeah.
stuck to the textbook. It's always about the relationship that the,
Mhm.
the educator built with the student. And so we need teachers to be able to do that, especially when we're talking about a district like CCSD. We have a lot of kids in poverty, a lot of kids with difficult home lives, a lot of kids going through things, traumas that we may or may not know about, and having the face-to-face relationship with a trusted adult is just, it's so essential for student success and even at minimum student survival.
Yeah, I have nothing against AI. I
Mhm,
feel like if you use it the right way,
mhm,
I believe it could be beneficial. I always remember, like you said, with my teacher, one of my teachers always being there throughout the tough times, right? When I
mhm.
was having a bad day, or where I didn't understand a lesson, or when I was learning English, there was my teacher teaching me certain words, staying with me after class.
Yeah.
So now I'm here
Yeah.
as a news reporter, but it takes that person, that personalized learning
Mhm,
to really help advance our kids.
mhm.
But again, nothing wrong with AI. It's just learning how to use it, not being
Right.
afraid of it, and learning how to collaborate with it as well as educators and parents,
Mhm.
because we're both.
Yes, yes, yeah, so, yeah, I mean, it's a great tool. I think, it would not be wise for people to just,
Yeah.
stick their heads in the sand and act like it's not a problem or it's gonna go away eventually, because I think there are so many people that have embraced how
Mhm.
useful it is, that I think its use already pretty widespread. I expect it's only gonna get bigger in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, Megan, thank you so much for joining us today. This is your education station. Today, we talked about AI in the classroom, how school districts are bringing together everyone within the school district to kind of work together and use AI in a sufficient manner. So, there you have it. Thanks for staying with us. We'll see you soon. Bye now.